So welcome to our event, Show Up for History, Decolonizing the Nation of Immigrants myth with Dr. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. This event is organized by College of Marin's Umoja Equity Institute and sponsored by College of Marin's Puente Learning Community and Umoja Learning Community. And so we'd love to know who's present with us today. So if you can, we ask that you take a few moments to respond to our roll call poll that should be broadcast to you shortly. So if you see the roll call, please respond so we can know you're here. So again, thank you all so much for joining us on a beautiful Friday. My name is Yashika Crawford. I'm a faculty member in our Behavioral Sciences Department and proud Umoja team member. And so I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about the Umoja Equity Institute. It was established in the year 2020 in response to the movement for racial justice. It serves in providing professional development, program development, and to advocate in support of increased racial equity at the College of Marin and the community at large. One of our favorite proverbs that we hear from our coordinator, Professor Walter Turner, is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go go far, go together. The faculty, students, staff, and administration of the Umoja Equity Institute are committed to working collaboratively with our campus and community partners to ensure successful implementation of anti-racist, equity-minded practices at COM campuses and in Marin County. And so the team of the Puente Learning Community is a partner in this work. I am pleased to introduce you to Professor Blaise Woodleaf, faculty in College of Marin's College Skills and English departments, and co-coordinator for the Puente Learning Community. Please welcome Professor Woodleaf as she brings you greetings.
Greetings. I'm really excited to have you all here. I'm really excited that we're co-sponsoring it. So I am one of the co-coordinators. My partner, Dr. Luz Moreno, is not able to attend today. So I'll be representing for the team. And I see a few of our students in the participation list, so yay. So in case you want to know a little bit more about Puente, it's a nationally award-winning transfer preparation program in California community. More than half of the community colleges in California, about 65 or more, and some of our high schools, as well as it's expanded into Texas, and we're starting to have a few programs using that model in Washington State. The Puente Project mission is to increase the number of educationally disadvantaged students who enroll in four-year transfer and enroll in four-year universities, earn college degrees, and return to their community as leaders. How we do this is we build a community through having our students in transferable English courses for a year. Those courses focus on Latinx experiences and readings. We have comprehensive counseling until they transfer, mentoring from professional mentors as well as peer mentors. We connect with and help educate their families about the college process, and we take field trips to university. We've been operating at the College of Marin since 2008, and the majority of that time I've been the English instructor, which has been a real honor. We serve annually about 110, 120 students as they go through the program and continue finishing their coursework. The majority are first generation Latinx students, many of them immigrants or children of immigrants or dreamers. Based on our institutional research, our Puente students are more likely to persist in their English and succeed in it, to stay enrolled, to become transfer prepared and complete their college degrees at College of Marin. If anyone is interested in the program, we're always looking for new mentors. And if you are a student or know someone who might be interested, I'm gonna paste into the chat our email, as well as the page for our webpage for more information. So very excited to be here and looking forward to the talk. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Professor Woodleaf, for your warm introduction to the Puente Learning Community. We are fortunate at College of Marin to have some great scholars on our campus to support our student success and our progress towards institutional equity. I am pleased to introduce you to Professor Dwayne Big Eagle, faculty in our Social Sciences Department, who teaches courses in Native American history in our Ethnic Studies program. Please welcome Professor Big Eagle.
Thank you. And my job here is to welcome Roxanne. And Roxanne, you should know that there are at least a couple of Red Dirt Okie Indians here. So I want to make sure you understand that when I say welcome y'all. But I'll also say from my heritage, Hawe Wajashi Ninka, Wadobashkizani, Wahoa Ke, which is our way of welcoming you. I really am impressed with your writing and your, actually I was most impressed with your memoir today, because I happened to notice that your Red Dirt memoir starts off with the fact that Oklahoma in the early part of the 20th century, the first 15 years of 1900, was quite radical. I had no idea about that. That's totally been expunged from our history. Never heard of that before, but I believe it completely because of the rumors that I heard early on. So thank you for pointing that out. That was something that was new to me in many ways. I want to talk a little bit about your book, The Indigenous History of the United States. I love the fact that you are finally making Native American history more real and more accurate. It is an expansive book, completely accurate in detail, and I think Native American people owe you a debt for assembling a very different point of view, and a point of view more truthful than most Native American histories have been in the past, written by others. I think finally we began to see a history that really reflects who we are. And as you say, you know, the book, it's also a true history of the United States, because it does counter the colonial settler dogma, you might say. To me, it is also being a thoughtful history. It's a book about the future, because some of the things you talk about may point out and bring up possible solutions to many of the problems we face today. The fact that early Spanish explorers here in California, you may not have seen this, really thought they had entered a garden paradise with orchards of trees for fruit and nuts that people needed, the mosaic of garden, well, let me read what they said. The point that they were making was that this land was very well managed, that it wasn't a wilderness, as people sometimes think, that the traditional burning practice, for instance, outlawed by Spanish to protect their cattle, continued by the US government, lost sophisticated stewardship of the land by the native people. Juan Crispy, for instance, and Joaquin Miller described mosaics of meadows and open forests with tribal acorn orchards managed for thousands of years, land more like a park than a wilderness. I think this kind of thinking might be a real solution for the problems we face today. Things like controlled burning, cultural burning, they called it, really could make a difference because of the orientation toward profit and exchange of money and goods. We lost something that maybe we need to get back to. I like also the idea that, well, there's a Yurok woman named Elizabeth Arzuz who says we've been suppressing fire, and really what we've been doing is suppressing this critical piece of who we are as human beings. Fire isn't something apart from us, fire is family. When you realize that a third of Santa Rosa burned down a few years ago, you begin to see how important this kind of thinking can be and should be. I like also the non-hierarchical thinking of much of your book. There's a Kurok judge who doesn't allow her courtroom to put her high above her plaintiffs. She sits equal with them down at the table and tries to see their lives and what they need rather than some kind of hierarchical order of law. So basically, Roxanne, thank you so much for highlighting this amazing and hopefully very useful to all human beings book and thoughts. I think I'll leave it back and go back to Yashika.
Thank you so much, Professor, for providing that context. And I think we all look forward to taking your class in an upcoming semester. And so our moderator for our conversation with Dr. Dunbar-Ortiz is Professor Walter Turner, a dynamic educator and leader who is dedicated to moving our equity efforts in ensuring student success. He is College of Marin's Department Chair of Social Sciences, coordinator for the Umoja Learning Community, and founder and coordinator for the Umoja Equity Institute. Thank you, Professor Turner, for your service and leading us through our learning with Dr. Dunbar-Ortiz today.
I am so honored and almost to the point of speechlessness. College of Marin is very, very fortunate to have a team of people and type of support to be able to have a scholar activist such as Dr. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz here. A couple of things come to mind very quickly, and we'll get an introduction, and then we'll begin our conversation. Kwame Ture, known as Stokely Carmichael, from the country of Trinidad, very active in the Black Power movement, the founder of the All African People's Revolutionary Organization, worked for many years in Africa. He used to always talk about speaking truth to power. And I think those were some of the points that Professor Big Eagle was making, that Dr. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz has always spoken truth to power. It also brings into mind what Kwame Ture used to say about being a long distance runner, meaning that somebody who's ready for the marathon, somebody who's ready for the real struggle. And we're having somebody today who has many, many years of activism in Europe and Mexico and Cuba. A friend of mine told me she was on the one of the brigades, the Vince Ramos brigades, which went to Cuba in the early 1960s to support and learn from the Cuban Revolution. She's worked with the American Indian Movement, the International Treaty Council. She's brought the issues of indigenous people to the United Nations. She has over 100 trips to the areas of Central America, to Nicaragua, and to Honduras. She is one of the stars. It's interesting now that the California State Colleges are beginning to build in ethnic studies courses as a process to graduation and transfer. And Dr. Ortiz was doing that back in the 1970s. She's got about 15 different books. She finished her undergraduate work at San Francisco State. She bears a doctoral degree at the University of California in Los Angeles. She has an MFA in creative writing. You can tell that by reading her books. I was joking her before the program that I'd read her recent book twice, and that her book, An Indigenous People's History, which has won several awards, that my students have to read in all of my classes, no matter what the class is. They have to read the first 2 chapters of Indigenous People's History of the United States. She has a diploma in international and comparative law from Strasbourg, France. War in Vietnam, racism, South African apartheid, women's liberation, workers' rights. These are all things that Dr. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz has done. And I'm actually proud, very proud to say that she's a friend. She's a good friend. We've been in the same spaces at the same time, and I've always been trying to prevent her from causing more trouble and me being the mild and meek person. But she is just a really special person in my life. And I think Martin Luther King used the word agape, which meant this spiritual love and appreciation for Dr. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz as I know her. We're going to talk today, and I really want to have this be a conversation. So we won't do a lot of back and forth, just me asking questions, Roxanne responding. We want to create a conversation. We want to know how the past connects to the present and the present connects to the past. And you can go online, you can get her books, they're in the College of Marin Library, etc. So I want to thank everyone for supporting the program. And let's get started. You made a point when I saw you on Democracy Now! Talking about that even though President Biden had declared Indigenous Peoples Day, that, you know, they were still, I think his press secretary was saying that you still have Indigenous Peoples Day and you still have Columbus Day, and you were saying something that didn't work. So talk about those things to give our students and people who have joined some grabbing points here, because Hamilton was very, very popular presentation, play. So go that direction, and then we'll come back and I want to talk a bit about just this discussion about power relationships in terms of what does this indigenizing do to how decisions are made around education, health, and policing and resources. So do the Hamilton Columbus bit for us. Give us some of that, enough that we can bite it off and go back to the book. And then we're going to get back to the settler colonialism side, Roxanne.
Right, thanks. Yeah, well, you know, I should mention that I got involved with the American Indian movement with Wounded Knee as a expert witness, actually, in the trials afterwards, and then got involved with the international work. So that was that leeway. But yeah, I start with Alexander Hamilton. The 2015 blockbuster Broadway musical Hamilton, the Revolution, was really what led me to write this book. It was received with such massive joy, which continues today. It hasn't slowed down. I had long denounced the Nation of Immigrants rhetoric as a cover-up of the reality of US settler colonialism. And here comes a cultural phenomena that embodies the Nation of Immigrants deception. So I fumed about that. And then my editor, who I just published the year before, 2014, An Indigenous Peoples History with Beacon Press. And she said, well, why don't you write a book on that? So that's where the idea began. And it was going to be a small book just on Hamilton, the Revolution, and the phoniness of it. I mean, the Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's Puerto Rican, that is a colony, called himself an immigrant because his father an immigrant from moving to New York, and made the analogy with Alexander Hamilton as an immigrant who went from the Caribbean to New York. But that's the first deception, is not to even understand colonial history. This is the British Empire. Hamilton was a white man, all white, Anglo and Scots-Irish and Germans were honorary Anglos, were citizens of the British Empire. It didn't matter. It would be like going from California to New York to go to Columbia University today. You know, that you wouldn't say you're an immigrant to New York anyway, the United States didn't even exist when he moved to go to King's College, it was called at the time. The only university in the colonies, there were no universities in the Caribbean. So that was disturbing in itself, just seeing a settler from one colonial settler place. The Caribbean was actually nothing existed outside of slavery in the Caribbean. Everyone there, every white person there was involved in either slave trade, which he worked as an accountant, and anyone who was a merchant, that was a main commodity, either the slave body, buying and selling, or the material needs that such people had to support that central economic factor. So this, there was so much wrong with it. I went to see it. I found it the most oppressive 3 hours I ever spent in my life because of the ecstasy in the audience. It was very disturbing. And these are liberals, liberal audiences. It was performed live. They took it to the White House. It was Obama era. They also called, Obama, of course, gave it just the greatest praise in the world and said, this shows we're a nation of immigrants. And it really revived the Nation of Immigrants thing. It always annoyed me. It was in all the textbooks and all, but it wasn't on people's tongues that much until the Hamilton musical. But Hamilton was also, they also portray him in the musical as, and this is the Chernoff book, a non-historian journalist, Ron Chernoff, whose best-selling book. If you write a book about the founding fathers, you can be sure it's going to be a bestseller. Those are the most popular books, and it's a big, bulky book just filled with lies and misconceptions and misleading things. But calling Alexander Hamilton an immigrant, that then perpetuated the nation of immigrants. He was the most anti-immigrant of any of the founders. He was the author of the Alien and Sedition Acts that was to keep anyone out that wasn't Anglo. It was during the French Revolution. The US War of Independence took place when France supported, but it was the royal family. Then after that, there's the French Revolution. And he wants to make sure that not a single French revolutionary is able to sneak into the United States and possibly infect the population with ideas that might make them want democracy or more power, even, the settlers. So this was, and the reason I was just going to write this small book on, kind of what the first chapter is now expanded. But as I began thinking more about it, I thought, I really should take it on, take it through the whole history, continue it. And some of it was new territory for me. I am not an immigration expert. And the book is not really, there are many, there's a wonderful archive that exists. I really recommend looking into all these books that have been written on immigration in the last 10 years, many of them by refugees and immigrants themselves, and many from the third world. And they're very eye-opening. For instance, African immigrants who have been coming, since the loosening of the quotas that existed till 1965. They find themselves, like the Somalians, being placed as refugees in Black neighborhoods, poor Black neighborhoods. And it feels alien to them because, race is not a factor for them. They grew up, with all Africans. And so here they're suddenly in this place and they don't identify, but they start experiencing what it is to be Black. And it raises their consciousness quite a lot, pretty quickly.
There's another question. Is there any wonder why many white people are afraid of this information? That's in there. Other people are talking about looking forward to reading the book. Oh my goodness, here. Somebody put this in. Somebody put in, you should go on Netflix and watch the Raoul Peck, who worked a lot around Lumumba. His family was in the Congo early on. Exterminate all the brutes. That's something good. That's good. You get a good box of popcorn and sit around and watch Exterminate All the Brutes. Dr. Ortiz helped consult with that, and you can probably find some things there. She also mentioned, Dr. Ortiz, the work of Nick Estes, who is doing some great work, and you can find some of that also there. let me go, Roxanne, you don't want to hear me, but I remember reading The Wretched of the Earth many, many years ago, and reading it 2 or 3 times and saying, wow, I don't even know what I read here. And then going back and reading and maybe reading it the 8th time and saying, whoa, now I'm finally getting it. So when I read your book, it reminded me of The Wretched of the Earth, in that it's like a Stevie Wonder song. It's like every time you hear it, you hear something different. Every time you read it, you see something different. This issue that you talked about, the term of wilderness, the national parks. I was reading last night, you were talking about the Modoc, who are local here. They're in California. And you talked about Captain Jack, and you talked about Clear Lake, and a number of other things. So talk about this issue of land, wilderness, spiritual places, commodification of land, capitalism. Give us something here on this, so that we can, because this is one of the big pushes of Indigenous people, is on the issue of land. Share that with us, please.
Yeah, right. The main slogan of Native activists now, and even more conservative tribal leaders, is land back. A very simple demand: land back. Most of the land that is now in federal hands, which is a good deal, especially west of the Mississippi and California, in the West. This is land that was taken without treaties by the United States, and it includes, of course, the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the forestry, much of which a Native person is now in charge of Laguna Pueblo, Deb Holland. Let's see what she can do with it, because in the Department of Interior is also the most powerful fossil fuel giants in the world, the lobbyists that are so powerful, and real estate brokers. So it's a hard job, but I think it will raise a lot of consciousness about how this land needs to be restored to the appropriate Native nations. There's no reason why the National Park Service can't restore these sacred places. You go to Yosemite, you go to Yellowstone, you go to any of these parks, and you're in wonder. It's just amazing. And of course, it was the spiritual centers, it was the churches of the Native people. And some shared it, like the Black Hills was shared by about 5 different Native nations, who did all of their spiritual life there. And Yosemite was also shared by several California Native peoples, and in the north, of course, Mount Shasta, all the way, to Alaska and all, which is mostly federal land in Alaska. So all of this land, it can't be sold. The right wing keeps trying to, capitalists figure out a way to privatize public lands. But they can't sell what they don't have a deed to. And basically treaties were deeds that transferred. The legitimate ones that Native people feel their legitimate representatives negotiated, Native people recognize those treaties, but even those, they've been reduced from, let's say, the Great Sioux Nation, which was the whole of North Dakota, South Dakota, part of Montana, part of Nebraska, Minnesota. One unit of people, Lakota Dakota people, the Great Sioux Nation, it was called. And the Treaty of 1868 established that as their boundaries. It was narrowed down from their original land base because they were followers of the buffalo. But they agreed to this. But now It's been whittled down to little islands, 7 little islands separated from each other and surrounded by white settlers. So all of that land, including the Black Hills, were taken illegally and should be restored. And there are ways of doing that. You know, public lands, people don't live there. So no one has to be displaced. No settler has to be displaced for land to be returned. However, people who own land in the West and have any kind of consciousness, they can create, you know, life estates that that would revert the land to the appropriate native nation. Some people have done that in New Mexico with the Pueblos. So there are many ways that land can be restored so that native nations can build real societies, real nations. With, you know, now they were shoved onto the, you know, parts of their original territory, but the least arid parts, the most arid and the bad soil, and also just the smallness, you know, even the Navajo Nation is the largest, although it's the largest in contiguous territory, it's still not, you know, diversified enough. They've taken away most of the alpine areas, so it's mostly desert or semi-desert. And this is in the East, you know, in the East as well, the land that can be restored. So Native people have been fighting for that, you know, since the Red Power movement. They've been fighting for it forever. They went from, you know, the final disarmament and herded onto reservations that were locked down, so they couldn't leave without a pass. And in that situation, the lowest point in numbers and existence of Native people, lifespans of 30 years at the most. The lifespan now isn't great. It's 50 years old for Native men. And it's still, every indice is lowest for, and including even police violence is highest per capita for Native people and incarceration. So this is, you know, with this supposed democracy of winner take all, and of course we know that's not true because the Electoral College, at least the presidency, is it isn't winner take all. You know, it's like several Democratic presidents have lost by not getting the right electoral votes, even though they had tens of millions of more votes, including Hillary Clinton, and of course Al Gore. So it's a fake idea, but the idea that Native people only make up 2% of the population now, reduced by genocide, that they don't count. You know, they don't count. So the left too, and anyone interested in electoral politics had pretty well ignored Native people. And so they've really had to, you know, pre-colonial times, Native people had their own wars, had their own conflicts, had their own boundary disputes, but they developed diplomacy. It's just amazing. The Haudenosaunee, of course, are just the, you know, masters of diplomacy. Even today, the Six Nations of the Iroquois, before colonialism formed, the Iroquois Constitution, the role of women as having veto power over anything, and women being in charge of the granaries of corn, of food, and also being able to leave, you know, divorce, just set the man's things out the door, and that's it. So it was a paradise for women. And so this is these, you know, putting this kind of broken, these all of this was broken. Sacred items were purposely taken by the army because they knew these items were important to their rituals. So you had then Native people inventing the ghost dance and the Native American church, the peyote cult, which were pan-Native rituals that still take place today that don't require any kind of accoutrements, any kind of items as it would have in the past. The peyote is the sacred item and always accessible because it's a plant, you know. And the ghost dance takes no more than...
Any ideas, any plans for dealing with right-wing propaganda and brainwashing? So go for about another 5 or 6 minutes here on those 10 questions I just asked you. No, on the question about genocide and the one about what do academics do. And, you know, people can get the book, and let's count this as stage 1, and then we'll do stage 2 in the spring, and we'll bring you back over.
Well, thank you, Walter, for kind words, and I'd love to come back. Genocide is a really important concept. It's the only international human rights treaty that deals with groups rather than individuals. The human rights treaties are the individual right to, you know, civil rights, social and economic rights. They're wonderful documents, but only the Genocide Convention deals with group rights. On ethnic, religious, or other kind of grouping that makes a people, creates a people as such, a people, a nation, a community that has roots in history, often a common language and attributes. So this came out, of course, the Shoah, the Holocaust, the targeting mainly of Jewish people in Germany and Eastern Europe. And it also included ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism, copied after the United States. It's documented that they used the game plan of the United States in taking the West and how they took the East and deported the Jewish people and moved German Protestants onto their lands. So this came out, you know, with the establishment of the United Nations, that it didn't exist during the Nuremberg trials. So it's a post Nuremberg instrument, 1948. And it was devised it's called the prevention of and punishment of the crime of genocide. It's not specifically a war crime. Not all war crimes are genocidal, and not all acts of genocide include war. In fact, no one has to die technically for genocide to occur. It's breaking down a group so it can no longer exist and thrive as a group. It does include killing, active killing as one act of genocide, but also removing children from the family, like the boarding schools that forcibly removed decades and decades of children from Indigenous families. It's better known about Canada because they started, you know, digging up all the secret graves, but those exist in the United States as well and are being are being explored now. And so taking children from the group, creating conditions that make it impossible for the group to continue, which would be taking their land away, for instance, scattering them. So this, people misunderstand that genocide means just the Holocaust. It was to go, because what they saw, in looking, Ralph Lincoln, especially, who wrote the book that preceded the Genocide Convention, laying out what the history was and had a lot to do with its composition. Looking back at the pogroms that brought many Jews to immigrate to the United States in the 19th century, the pogroms in Eastern Europe of Christian ethnic cleansing of Jews, the pogroms destroying their villages, burning their villages, driving them into exile, into cities. And then, of course, this culminated, but it started in the Middle Ages, it culminated in the Holocaust. So the prevention of genocide, it doesn't have to come to the level of the Holocaust to be genocide. So that's why it's also, it was 1948, so it has anything that happened before 1948 can't retroactively, can't be punished under genocide. But in the United States, for that reason, did not ratify the Genocide Convention until 1988, 40 years afterwards. And those congressional discussions and Senate discussion are very, very revealing, because they expressed fear. Well, for one thing, Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois and others took a manifesto to the United Nations called "We Charge Genocide," for slavery. And so that had happened in 1949. And they talked about Native Americans, maybe they could charge genocide. So they kept delaying it, so that would be less likely, and maybe they could clean things up a little bit, So it wasn't until Duke Majan, very conservative California governor, who was a survivor of Armenian genocide, that doesn't come under the Genocide Convention because it was in the early 1920s. He talked Ronald Reagan. He was a good friend of Ronald Reagan. So when Reagan became president, he talked him into pushing for ratification. And that's how it happened in 1988. But they made many, many exceptions. Any treaty, a nation state can make exceptions, and they have a whole list of exceptions. But I do think that charges of genocide can still be made against the United States, both for the effects of slavery that still keep the Black population, descendants of enslaved Africans, in positions of persecution and oppression and economic desperation, and Native Americans who still have trauma, the trauma from past genocides that. So I know that for Native people, when they went to the United Nations, this was in 1977, and have built a big caucus that now includes Indigenous peoples from all over the world. These are colonized people who have never had access to decolonization, and have made great strides, including the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of 2007. I worked with that project throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I kind of retired from it since then, but it's so powerful and important. And the Genocide Convention is very, very central to studies that are being done. So it's important. Everyone should go look it up, Google text of the Genocide Convention, and it's right there before your eyes. It's a very simple, non-technical, self-explanatory text
Yes.
that very few people go read.
It definitely is. There's so much in the chat. Question about how to address these issues of trauma. More discussion under this definition. Palestine would be an act of genocide. Is estimated up to 1.5 million Armenians. The Indian residential schools. I know there's some work being done on the mission schools. There are people doing research on this. This is a topic that we're fortunate to have Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz bring to us and kind of fertilize the ground here so we can go further in terms of work we're doing with the UEI and the commitment at the College of Marin to equitize, to bring equity and inclusion, empowerment, and agency to the College of Marin and to the College of Marin community. I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank so much for Puente. You can reach them through the College of Marin website, support their work. The Umoja Learning Community, the Umoja Village will be opening up soon. I want to thank very much Professor Dwayne Big Eagle. I want to thank the Umoja Equity Institute, all of them who are here today. I want to give a special shout out to Dr. Colleen Mihal, who has been doing a lot of the communication and the graphics, etc. I want to thank all of the attendees. I want to thank the College of Marin. And most importantly, I want to thank, they have a word, what is it? Regalo. And I know you speak Spanish, which means essentially it's a gift. And Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz is a gift to all of us. So again, you'll be able to find this in the Umoja UEI view site, and that's in the thing. And Roxanne, you want to say anything as we're sadly leaving our time with you? Any last word for us?
Well, I hope one day we can all see each other in person and have, more dynamic cross discussion. But meantime, good luck with your the important projects you're working on. And I know, Walter, you have been at it for many, many years and made College of Marin a much better place. My daughter went there back in the 1970s, and it's an important institution.
Okay, you're going to Roxanne, you will definitely see us again.
Good.
You don't even have to think about that. That's a wrap. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank everyone for being here. So much appreciation, and take good care and be safe out there.